The focus of today is how these guys have been involved in the hiring process, right?
Guys and gals.
Yeah. Well, by guys, I mean everybody. So we wanted to kind of give you an insight from the insight into the process. If you're looking to get into UX, for example, to learn more, and to have maybe an edge over other candidates, to see like how that process works. If you are on the other side, for example, which is probably the minority of you, but you can also potentially learn how to hire great candidates. Like what's the process? What the process should be like. So with that said, I want to introduce our awesome speakers. I'm actually going to help them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I currently work at a startup called Alpha. We are building an enterprise software platform to aid in user research.
Hi, I'm Amos. I am not a hiring manager, and I'm barely qualified to be here, but I have been on the recruiting side. I actually helped this man work where he is now, and I try and help junior UX people, and not just junior UX people, change careers and kind of learn how to understand the other side's mentality.
Nice. I have been a designer with many different names for about 13 years. I've been on the either side of Amos, take that as you will. And I am currently working for a Fortune 500 through an agency.
I actually hired people too, actually.
Yeah.
Do you hire people?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Just got 2 brand new designers. Fairly recent.
That'd be good.
One is starting on Monday, so yet to be tested.
All right, sounds good. So we're going to get started with kind of the first step in the process, right? So I might refer to some notes here. I'm not just getting distracted. So where did you guys find the actual candidates? Like the first step in the process, like before you actually get any interviewing or any design exercise, anything like that. How did you source them? Like if you were involved in that process?
Well, we have job listings on AngelList. We have a job listing on our website, and I recently heard about this other site called Local Solos. We put a listing on there.
Do you use Indeed?
Sorry?
Do you use Indeed?
No, I mean I think so. Like I've also taken a look at student sites as well, just to experiment with that. That hasn't been as successful, to be honest. And full disclosure, I haven't paid for any advertising. I actually go to events like this, and I recruit like this. So if you are interested, talk to me afterwards. But I actually have the most success at telling people what we do at events like this, and then talking to people afterwards.
So recruiters have databases. Junior people are not likely to be on those databases. Then I would say we troll LinkedIn a lot. A lot of recruiters also send a lot of mass emails. And I think that's probably the biggest way. AngelList, and they also post on Indeed. Those are probably the biggest ways that they find their candidates.
I know at our agency, referrals. We want people that have a certain knack for wanting to do what they do, and chances are is that if you have one person on the team that is like that, you're likely to trust that person to find other people like them. So we end up getting a lot of referrals.
So you kind of mentioned a few different channels. Are those your actual favorite channels that you use? Like, what do you think is like the one best? If you have just one option, just pick one. What would you use?
It's not the channel.
Yeah.
Like it's not. Like I mean, we use a multitude of channels. It's not the channel.
Because the reason I'm asking is basically to, if somebody's looking for a job, right? Where should they go? Should they go to events, or should they look at Indeed?
A referral is always going to be more meaningful than anything else, but when companies are trying to hire at scale, it's hard for them to be able to get enough people from that, so they also use their other channels. So like referral will always be the best way of getting a job, always, as long as that person actually knows you and has a good relationship with the hiring manager. If that person doesn't know you very well and doesn't have a very good relationship with the hiring manager, their referral is pretty meaningless on the whole. If they can get your resume directly into someone's hands, that's always a good thing, instead of having to go through like a greenhouse or an applicant tracking system. But yeah, I mean, if you can only choose one channel, then it's referral, but that's just not a scalable enough solution.
So Thomas referral, Michelle, you said there's no one best, right?
Well, so the way we recruit is a little different, and I'll go into that later, but I test them. So I test candidates, and we give them a prototyping test. And anything that anyone who doesn't pass doesn't qualify. So for me, it's less about the channel, and it's more about can you do what we need you to do with very vague information. That's the true test. I don't really believe in any one channel. I will say, in terms of getting through that process, it's easier if you do speak to someone in person and they usually follow up. But for me, I recruit at large scale, so it's different. If you recruit at a much smaller scale, you're looking to fill 1, 2 positions. What's going to happen is you're going to really pick your criteria, and you're going to set up interviews for like maybe 5 candidates. For me, I get as many candidates as possible, and I give as many prototyping tests out as possible, and then that's how we vet.
Yeah, so that's great.
And we're going to explore that in much more detail.
And I think one of the things that I would say it depends. So being in a large company, there are some times where you have like this sea of people and a variety of different points of views within it. And oftentimes in these large companies, I'm gonna go ahead out there, and this is gonna be recorded. I may regret this, but culture might matter a little less because you have a bigger opportunity to mix with people, right? So when you're hiring quickly, you want people that are able to communicate successfully, and regardless of the channel, you're gonna want to test them. Whether they came in through word of mouth or whatever else, you're going to want to test them. You're going to want to see that their thinking shines above everything else. That they came through means that they're at least tested in that this person hopefully worked with them previously and knows that this person can communicate, can execute, et cetera, et cetera. They should be vouching for certain things. It's not just, I know them, but how do you know them? And what qualities about them are you actually recommending?
And also, by the way, there are 2 different types of channels. There are the active ones and passive ones. So there are active ones in which a talent acquisition specialist or whatever will actively go after LinkedIn or whatever and find people on a more individual level. Like if you have like LinkedIn Recruiter, you can actually like kind of like add individuals to a list and then send them all a message at the same time. That's what some recruiters do. But then there's the passive ones where you post a job and then you get like an influx of inbound applications.
Right.
Depending on the platform, if you're using like an Indeed, then my experience with that is that you get a gigantic amount of shit. Like you're just gonna get so many awful applications. Like you might get someone who's in the wrong country who like meets none of your qualifications. So like I look down on those a little bit more. If you're applying through like a greenhouse or something that's going through an applicant tracking system, which is automatically gonna scan for keywords and reject a lot of resumes before they ever reach the recruiter's eyes. So they often tend to prefer those, but if you're not, you could be a great candidate. One of the reasons I actually like what you said is that there are a lot of great candidates who are really bad at putting together a resume, which might speak to their lack of qualification in some regard. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's a good practice to be able to give people a test and maybe see if there's something the resume missed. But at the same time, most companies just don't do that. So if you're going through an ATS, you should be pretty sure that your resume is primed to actually go through there. And
ATS?
Applicant tracking system.
It's the recruiter professional.
Yeah,
Slang,
there you
recruiter
go.
slang.
The keywords
Just trying
on
to
that.
demystify the TLAs.
Just remind you guys of the format, right? So we'll do the panel. It's going to be an interactive panel. So if you have a question, feel free to just raise a hand. Just make sure it's on the same topic. Right? Don't ask me about other things. And we'll do a more formal Q&A after like 40 minutes or so. So the next step, right? Let's say you shortlisted or whatever, you picked a few candidates. What do you do?
As I mentioned, we have a test. So, and I should say that unlike these 2 gentlemen, the way that I recruit is I recruit for the design bench. So the Alpha Design Bench is a group of freelance designers who work off-site, who prototype and design on demand. So our turnaround time is we ask that you turn everything back in 3 hours or less. And the way that we achieve that is we simplify the assignment and we give you a lot of leeway and we take out a lot of the steps that normally amount to more time to fulfill the request.
You're also being less selective than you would be if you were hiring like a full-time on-site designer,
Yes.
right?
Well, yes and no. So the criteria changes. It's not that we're less selective, it's that
More
our...
selective about other things.
Exactly right. So for example, culture fit, not really something we test for, all right? Communication skills, absolutely. Because if you have to work with a remote resource, that person needs to be able to communicate well. Hard prototyping and design skills. We give a very vague prototyping assignment. It's vague by design because the primary users of this service are not designers. And what you should all know is that is just life. The people who request designs, by and large, are not going to be designers. They're going to be people who don't know how to do this, and that's why they need your help. So it's a very real-world situation. So people go into our platform and they request something they need created for the purposes of testing. We have designed a test that kind of simulates that, and you can use different prototyping tools depending on your level, and we can see a lot. Because we can tell how you think by how you fill the gaps. It is deliberately vague. Some people like it, some people don't. If you don't like vagueness, you're not a good fit. And then it becomes a technical thing. Like, can you use the prototyping tool in a way that accurately represents what we need? If there are things that look sloppy or feel missed, you're not a good fit. So, like, again, we are specific and we do have high standards, but to Jose's point, it's not the same type of standard.
Could you go into a little more detail, like the vagueness part, like why specifically you're looking for people who...
Because people who are going to be requesting, by and large, are not designers. And on top of that, they're going to be specific about the wrong thing. So they're going to say to you, I want an InVision prototype that acts like a calculator. And if you know anything about InVision, you know that it's really not meant to do that. And if you do that, you're going to create a prototype with a few more screens, which is not great for multiple reasons. It's going to exceed multiple hours, and it's going to be really, really hard to load off-site quickly. So that's not what we want. We want, like, we want you to get a request, and it's like, I need a calculator app, and it might say InVision, it might not. And I need the type of designer to go, okay, InVision's not the right tool for that. I'm going to use another tool.
Like to add a little context, Alpha is like a platform where enterprise can like request projects to be built. So like oftentimes it'll be someone who has no idea what this stuff really takes making a request. So the requests that come in will be very vague and not very high quality, and it's important that the person be able to deal with that. So that's why you have your test demo.
Exactly.
What about you guys? Yeah, the next one.
I'm actually going to piggyback off of what you just said. I mean, there's sometimes where you're in a fairly large company and you are getting requests for features within this amazingly large product, and the people making the request also don't have an idea of what is feasible and what can be built. So oftentimes, the way that we structure our tests is to provide the user, not the user, here we go. Provide the testee, if you will, with
Very good.
Provide the
Very good.
person that we're trying to test with a real life scenario. So you provide them, say for instance, with like the checkout screen at Seamless, and give them a Seamless wants to achieve XYZ, and this is the point where they want to achieve it. How would you handle something like that, right? And then a few things. One, there is a certain level of vagueness as well, but the test there is, are you going to ask me questions in return, essentially beginning to execute what you would do on the job, which is your discovery session. How much discovery are you going to do? How much time are you going to spend on each section? Are you just going to say, okay, that's what it is, and give me 5 prototypes? Or are you going to spend more time asking me questions and give me 2 prototypes that best match the solution for that problem? And it's usually the latter who are going to end up winning out.
Yeah, but that's not your first round. Like the first round at most places is a phone screen.
Oh, we're doing first round?
Yeah.
Oh, first round COO is probably just having a quick conversation. Yeah, just doing a phone screen.
COO right away, so not
Well,
a recruiter,
it
HR
depends.
person.
It depends on the candidate. So for me, it was COO. I spoke to them
But
first.
you also got a referral directly,
Yeah.
right?
So I was talking to them directly.
Mhm.
With a lot of others, it may end up going through somebody in HR first.
Yeah, and that's just
Still
the
gotta
worst.
follow the-
That's the worst.
That's
That's the worst. And hiring managers hate it too, and recruiters hate it when basically someone in a somewhat technical field goes through HR and they actually have no idea how to assess any remotely technical skills, which makes it kind of fucked up, because that means, like, if you're applying, let's say through an ATS or applicant tracking system, you have to design your resume to be able to get through there. Then you have to design your resume also to be able to be understood by an HR person who will then think you're still worthy of being passed on. And then you also have to be build it so that the hiring manager, him or herself, will think that you're a qualified candidate. So there's kind of a really messed up dynamic here where you have to build a resume for 3 separate audiences just to be able to get a job through
It's
them.
actually your biggest UX test, if you think about it. Yeah, you have to build it for 3 different personas depending on where you are within your journey.
100%.
So,
Yeah, it's really ridiculous. So I would honestly recommend trying to cut the line as much as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Get referrals, get introductions, but don't, I don't know, a lot of people will try and get introductions or referrals from people they don't really have strong relationships with. Or they'll go to events and it's just so evident that what you're looking for and all you give a shit about is not the person you're talking to, but whatever introductions they can make for you. And so it smells like desperation, and obviously no one likes to feel like, oh, that person is talking to me because I might be able to get him a job. So I would say if you can go to events and meet people and build authentic relationships, and then 2 months down the line, you know, talk to them and see if you can get a referral after having met them, grabbed coffee several times, been in contact, gotten advice from them, then that's a great way of doing things.
Yeah, and I will say for the record, hiring is really messy right now. There are tons of people being hired for positions that they are not qualified for, and there are tons of people being passed over for positions that they are qualified for. So if you can get in front of a human and you have prepared whatever it is that you plan to present ahead of time, you have a much higher success rate. But it's really, really messy. Like, I've now heard multiple times where people go through multiple rounds of interviews for designers, and they'll maybe meet 30 of them, and they'll finally hire one at the end of 2 months. And I'll ask them, be like, oh, so you found the candidate you really liked? And he's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this person is any better than the first 4 we met. But there's a lot of fear because the market right now is really volatile. And there's a lack of awareness and understanding around the skill sets of what are needed and what's to come. And it's highly, highly dependent on the place that you're interviewing for. Like, if you're interviewing for a place that is much older and large, and they're having difficulties transitioning into like a newer technology, they're going to be looking for a different type of person. If you want to go work at a hot startup, they're going to be looking for a different type of person. So what is the hardest thing to do, but it, in my opinion, is the most it's the most beneficial for both parties, is that you kind of have to decide who you are first. You have to decide who you are first, what kind of designer you are, who you want to work for, and why. And you have to make those decisions. You can talk to people, you can get informational interviews, you can bounce things off of people, but at a certain level, you have to decide who you are.
the thing with that is too is that as much as you may end up getting a yes or a no from the other side, it's on you to also provide a yes and a no. It's dating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if at the end of the day you go and you interview and you're listening to what it is that they need based on what it is that they're asking for, if they're considering you, say for instance, like just a pair of hands, like I'm the brains, all you're gonna do is just put wireframes down. That's all I need you for. And there are places like that. You just need to put wireframes down, run. You're not gonna learn anything. You're not going to be doing discovery. You're not going to be seeing the product once it goes out and optimizing it. You're not going to be getting your hands dirty with all of the other things that actually matter as well.
Yeah, but let's be honest, like how many junior UX designers are in a position to be able to turn down an offer,
That's
even
true.
if it's at like a suboptimal place? You know, like if they're getting an offer to work as a UX designer, like it's tough to say no when you don't know if there's going to be a better offer coming down the pipeline. Though I think that saying no might still be beneficial, but that's a little scary.
Quick question. Just regards to you talking about the market and how it's messy and the hiring process, etc. Looking at that board of all those products out there, isn't that what those products are built to do, to remedy that problem of like hiring? It's just like, I look at that sea of logos, I'm like, what are they doing? You know, how is it making things better?
It's a human problem, all right? Every piece of software, as far as I know, with very few exceptions, was built by a human, all right? And humans are flawed, and we make poor decisions all the time. And
Of course.
whatever product is out there, some human is at the end of that. So those products do not solve our problem. Those products can augment our existing problems, and they can make certain problems go away and make other problems more prominent.
Yeah.
That's just to comment on that. A lot of that is basically in progress, right? So you'll, like, if you really dig into that map, you'll see like how much stuff there is and how few things recruiters or hiring managers actually know about out of all that stuff existing. And down the road, I think ultimately it's probably going to be the case in all professions, but just AI is coming. So it's machine learning is going to be replacing a lot of that stuff.
Also, a lot of them do the same thing. You know, like there's Jazz, Lever, Greenhouse. Like there are a lot of like competitors in the same space. You know, but they're not. It's not like a whole stack that you have where it's like, oh man, from like soup to nuts, we can like recruit people super easily. I mean, it's just a lot of them are centered around the ATS space, and then there's also candidate management systems, which a lot of ATSs are doing as well. Like a lot of it's centered around the same things, and then there are things like companies like Pymetrics, which are basically doing recruiting through psychographic analysis of how you like play certain brain games, and they'll like put together a psychographic model. And I think Unilever is actually using that for all of their new entry-level hiring. So like companies are playing around with this, but like people still don't really know how to hire very well and very reliably. Like if you actually look at like the top companies, like I'm talking like gigantic tech companies like IBM, they don't hire for best quality. They hire for reliability because what they're concerned about is hiring at scale and making sure that they can predict how all their different departments will perform across geographies, departments, whatever. So they use these tools that just focus on reliability. And then there are other companies. I would say there are probably two hiring mindsets. One is risk avoidance, and one is gain maximization. So basically, there's the mindset of, oh shit, I need to make sure this person won't fuck up my company, and then there's like, I need to hire the best person possible. And in my experience, although I could definitely be wrong, I haven't seen necessarily that startups are more prone to just be looking for the best people possible. I've seen lots of risk avoidance in them too. I think it's more down to the individual hiring manager. So it's very hard to predict that, except at large companies, it's almost always going to be, we're looking to make sure that we're mitigating risk wherever possible.
So also, maybe in the course of this session today, maybe we can come up with an improved process, right? And come up with the optimal way to do it. So just to kind of recap, right? So you find a candidate, so whichever your preferred channel is, right? Then you maybe do a phone interview, or your recruiter does, or somebody does. So then you give that test project right after that, or do you do the in-person interview first?
Depends.
Like how have
If you're trying to bring in a lot of people, I would probably put the test first. Help that weed out a couple of people. Otherwise, you would want to meet the person. Like if you're being extremely selective and it's going to be just, you have like 1 or 2 seats open, you're going to want to meet the person. If it's a small team, you're really going to want to meet that person.
It also depends. It also depends on how selective the company can afford to be. That's the wrong way to put it. Basically, if there aren't very many, if you're trying to hire a very senior interaction designer, right? That person's not going to want to take a 3-hour code test, or not code test, design challenge early on in the interview process. They want to be able to go, because it's more time on them. So those people don't want to do it, so hiring managers can't get away with giving them tests early on in the process. The designers themselves will kind of demand or want to go to a few interviews, make sure that they actually like the company themselves, and then they can give them some kind of design challenge. For more junior people, companies know that they're more desperate for the job than the company is to hire them, so they give them the code test earlier or the design challenge earlier.
Sean, what do you think?
Goes back to what you said about dating. You have the hot girls and the hot guys, and they know people want to date them, so they're not gonna waste their time with people unless they know they want to be desired and they want to be chased, right? You have the other, right? You have the other group of people who maybe feel like they have something to offer, but are willing to open the wider net, and you have some other people who are newer at the game and are trying to have as large a pool as possible. So it just really, it really depends.
So basically, it sounds right like you're saying, if you're a more senior, test comes later. If you're more junior, more new to the field, test comes earlier.
If you're
Right,
more
so
serious,
basically,
you gotta test.
if a lot of people
Yeah.
here are actually getting into it, so probably they'll get that test earlier in the process.
Yeah, I
A lot of
mean,
people are very against, a lot more senior people are very against tests these days, or any kind of like free work. And if you have like a body of work and actual results that you can show somebody like, oh hey, I did this for this company and it had this result, like you don't really need to do a test as much if you've done it in several different environments. If you've only like performed in one kind of environment, then you might need a test. But if you, let's say, have worked for lots of different kinds of clients or different kinds of companies on the client side, then that's not really as much of an issue. It's a proving yourself thing. And junior people are more desperate to have to prove themselves. More senior people who have more options, they don't care as much. So yeah, she's right. It's desperation.
yeah, but I mean, again, it's also about matching, right? So, like, I go back to what is it? Who are you? What is it that you want? And who do you think would be a good partner in order to get there? So I work with very senior people, but bear in mind, all of our work is part-time and off-site, and I work with people who have full-time jobs, who are kind of bored, and they do something at night. Or they are full-time freelance and they want something to do while they're in between projects. So the criteria doesn't really apply. Now, don't get me wrong, I definitely have the candidate that says, you know, just so you know, I charge $150 an hour and I'll do this spec work for you, but moving forward you should know that. And that's outside our budget. Like, we don't pay that much. So that's not a good fit for us. But that doesn't mean that person's not a qualified person. Like, it's just like we have a set of criteria. And and also, as I mentioned, our turnaround time is really fast, our iteration cycles are short. You're not going to be booked on a project for 3 months. The type of designer who wants to be booked on a project for 3 months or 6 months to a year is the type of person that in their portfolio has to prove that they have done that type of work, that they have done the politics of design, that they have worked with senior stakeholders, that they can sell. I don't have that criteria, so my criteria is different.
I want to piggyback on what you said, because I think the be yourself thing, you know, or know who you are, is important. I actually agree rule number 1 is be yourself, and that's not because you are the best person in the world. It's because whoever else you pretend to be probably sucks a lot more than you do. That's a really shitty way of saying it. I apologize. But basically, if you try to pretend to be somebody else, you can smell it. If you seem like you're willing to be a chameleon, like hiring managers can smell it, and they really can. Like even if you think that you're really a great actor, they can tell. And if you have a point of view, like that's one thing I think a designer should always have a point of view. If you come to them with a point of view and you sound more mature, and this is what I'm looking for, this is the environment I want, you stand a much better chance than if you're just like, oh, I'll do whatever you want. At all, like I'll work for you free for 3 months just so like you can then give me like whatever you bring to the table insofar as perspective is concerned is way more important than kind of the flexibility. So I would say
if they don't even want you, then you might want to. If you approach the let's say you're in the beginning of your journey, right, and they didn't even reach out to you, you didn't get connected to them, you reach out to them yourself and ask, can I do this work for you? They don't care about you, right? I mean, they're going to pay you. They may not even want to, you to do the work for free.
yeah.
So in that
That's
case,
typically not what they care about, like because like whatever they're paying you to do the work, it's probably less money than they'll end up making from it, or less than it's actually worth. So I'd say a lot of people tend to think, oh, if I stay more flexible and malleable, then that'll make me like more open, or seem like I'm more open to a wide range of positions. But really, what that means is that you'll just have less appeal to more people. Whereas if you kind of focus yourself and say, this is the space I want to operate in, this is what I'm really good at, this is my point of view, then you'll just have a stronger appeal to a smaller group of companies. So I think that's really important, is identifying what you're passionate about, what you're really good at, and be very honest and very blunt with yourself about that. And then figure out who those companies are, tailor your resume and your portfolio specifically to appeal to them. Purposely limit yourself in terms of the scope of companies that you'd be a good fit for, and that way you'll appeal to those hiring managers much, much more than anyone who's just like, I'm seeking any UX design opportunity that will hire me and give me a chance. That's just, yeah.
So let me just double check, yeah.
Do you think that changes if they're contracting versus full-time? What you're talking about sounds like if you're going to find a good home, but then if you're doing, 15 hours, 5-10 hours a week remote, or if you're doing a short-term contract that you don't really care, you just want to build a lot of experience at different industries, and as well you want to have a job tomorrow that you can start. So in that case, it probably should be flexible, but
I mean, it depends on how selective the company can afford to be. Like if they're just looking for a contractor, they just need something done. It doesn't necessarily matter how high quality the work is. Then sure, if you're just looking for short-term contract work with like very small companies or small agencies, then sure. But if you're looking for like a full-time job or contract work with like a higher quality agency, then you probably need to do that.
Well, also I will say, and it's not the case with my company based on our structure of the design bench, but it is really common to do a short project for freelance and go in-house. Like that happens all the time, where you have like a
Temp to perm.
yeah,
Temp to
exactly.
perm.
So you're being tested as the temporary hire.
But they usually tell you that. Because there are a lot of companies that will work, but there are a lot of agencies that basically just hire outside people to do temp work, but have no interest in hiring them. So when I was recruiting, we had like RGA, for example, which is a top tier agency, and they just had like short-term needs, and Sapient Nitro before they were Sapient Razorfish. Like again, they were constantly hiring people for temporary roles. They had no interest in bringing on full-time at all. So like typically,
that could be okay too.
Yeah, no, that's
I
totally
did
legitimate.
years of nothing but freelance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to build up experience. Nothing but freelance. And if they offered me a full-time job, I said no. Because I already know I know the projects that are coming up for you, and I want none of them. So I'm gonna look elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so I kept hopping, and that just grew my portfolio. And then at that point, I got to be pickier, right? So flipped it.
Yeah.
More questions?
So how do your processes,
Can you speak up a little bit?
how are your processes either similar or different for UX research? We've been talking a lot about design, and I did hear someone talk about discovery at the beginning. But how do these processes differ for research?
So we actually recruit for researchers as well. So we have the research bench, which is different, right? And I will also say that I have actually approached applicants who applied for the research bench and brought them onto the design bench.
Yes.
Because what I've found is people who have a good eye for research and a good eye for design are a very, very good fit for what we do. Because they know how to create a design or a visual stimuli for the purposes of testing, which is not necessarily the same thing as when you go in-house or you're designing for a client. So they are different disciplines. I think that, in my opinion, and I would love to hear these guys' opinions, it's really hard to do both well at the same time. And you have to decide which hat you're wearing, okay? So the same person can do it, but you can't do the research and do the design at the same time. That doesn't work, okay? You have to be like, I'm wearing my research hat, I'm gonna, do my interviews, I'm gonna do my script, I'm gonna do all that stuff, I'm gonna gather the intel, gather the data, and then once you've gathered all that information, go into a corner and you switch hats, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna be the designer now. If you're lucky to be on a team where you don't have to wear both hats, that's awesome. But you cannot do both at the same time. And I think what is difficult is that a lot of companies don't necessarily realize that. And they also want you on top of that. They want you to be the researcher, they want you to think about the user experience, and they want you to think about the UI. And again, you cannot do those things at the same time. You can be the same person and do all those things if you are extremely qualified. There are not very many people who can do all three very well. There are a decent amount of people who are strong in one and okay in the other two. So, like, if that's your area of focus, in my opinion, then own that and have that be part of your story and go really, really deep on what real research is and how to make the data meaningful and relate to results. And maybe you want to partner with someone who is trying to get their feet wet on the other side of the house, and maybe you can present your information together. That's one idea. But like, don't pretend, in my opinion, don't pretend you can do all three awesomely at the same time, because you're going to end up in situations where they're going to expect that, and it's not realistic.
I mean, I don't think it's going to get that far. I think that the hiring manager is going to realize that you can't do all three as well as you think you can and just not hire you well.
There are some places.
There are people
There's some places that they'll try to squeeze absolutely everything out of you.
Oh yeah, definitely.
To that point, I think the best hires are teams, right? you have a wide rate of knowledge,
Shape skill set.
you're gonna end up going deep on one. That said though, there are some, like I have seen people who are, say for instance like, great at research, and they may have an analytics background, they're just not just providing you data, but they're providing you insights.
Yep.
And they're very useful, and then there's the people that are very good at doing the UX and the UI, but they won't do all of them. And I happen to call those people a bold T, because they go deep in two, right? So it's a little bolder. But for the most part, you're gonna have people that go wide on a lot, which is great because it means that you can interact with the project managers, you can interact with the stakeholders, senior, internal, external, your devs, you need to interact with your devs, and other designers as well. And not every designer brings the same skill set, right? So you're gonna have the visual designers, you're gonna have the UX designers, there are some people that are great at doing some of the stuff and making it look good. There's some people that are just purely information architects, and they're okay at wireframes, but they're more balsamic than they are sketch. I have a thing for balsamic. And it depends, but you need to interact with all of them. You need to have like a nice wide range of expertise, or knowledge of at least, but be really good at something.
Yeah.
And this ties back to the same thing that both of you have been saying the entire evening, which is you kind of have to know who you are, what you want to do.
Let's just
I would
take
also
one
say
more.
that,
Sorry.
like if recruiters and HR don't know what UX designers do, I think they kind of especially don't know what user researchers do. So that means they kind of try and look at all the things that they can understand, like where you went to school, for example. Like that's still definitely very much being looked at, as much as some people will try and tell you that like, even if you have a few years of experience or whatever, it doesn't matter, like it definitely does. There are other things you can do, like that's why I try and advocate, anyone who wants to get a job in a certain field, go out and do that shit. Like you don't, like, we're in a world where you can build technology on your own. Even if you don't know code, you can use like Bubble or some other tool. So work on your own projects. Like you mentioned, like partner up with a designer who wants to get a job, make some cool shit, bring some results out so you have something to show. Because if you don't have enough to show someone who's not capable of analyzing a technical skill, then they're gonna look at what they do know, and if you don't have that, like you didn't go to a top research university, right? You don't have a great PhD, then you're kind of screwed. So that's why I think real world things will always trump just like something on a resume.
Also, just a side note, everyone should do a little research. All of you. Like really, you should just do it. It's so easy to do right now. There are ridiculous amounts of resources online,
Yeah.
right? Like honestly, like any one of you can write a script and go interview someone today, and you can do it with 5 people. It's not that hard, and you are going to learn a ton. You're going to learn way more when you screw up. You're going to get the results and realize you didn't ask certain questions. You're going to get answers and realize that, oh, I should have phrased it this way, or oh, I forgot to do this, or oh, I forgot to show that. That is going to be way more valuable in the long run, and even if you don't want research to be your primary focus, you will be able to talk to other people about your survey data, about your interviews, and why you should ask certain questions in a certain way. Like, it's just extremely valuable.
I will say, don't just do it online. I'm a big fan of field interviews or field surveys. I think that builds crucial soft skills, and also just, I think it builds up your balls, to be perfectly blunt about it. Like, I think going up to strangers and being able to talk to them and being able to get them to actually take a survey is impressive. And once you like start doing it, you'll get some rejection. But rejection is good, you know? I think it's important to be able to learn to deal with that and be able to actually learn how to position a value proposition to someone in person in real time. Like, I think that's a big part of what a UX designer has to be able to do, is be able to position value to users. Yeah, if you can't do that in person, then I don't think you can do that very well on the internet either.
So kind of to summarize, right? I don't think the actual process will be that much different. The content of like the actual exercise or the interview will be different, right? But not the overall kind of big picture. So one more question, and I'll come back here.
Okay, yeah, someone else.
I was wondering, at what point do you look at portfolios and how do you assess them?
At what point you look at portfolios and how you assess them?
Yeah, that's probably one of the first things
Immediately.
that's going to come through. Yeah. And how do you assess them? You're not just looking for pretty pictures. At the end of the day, what I want to see is all the dirty work. I want to see the process. Like, if you're a painter, I want to see the first couple of strokes, the things that you tore apart and threw away. I want to see the stuff that didn't make the cut. Like, I want to see your cutting room floor, right? Like, why were some of these things deleted? What, at the end of the day, made the thoughts that won out, win out? Like, why did it get there? What were your thoughts? How did you build your personas? Who were you thinking about at the moment, right? Like, to build all the stuff out. The data. Going back to the data, if you're making insight-driven decisions, I want to see all that process. And instead of seeing, say, for instance, like 12 projects, if you show me 3 to 5 projects that are really well written out, case studies, you tell me this is where I started, this is the team that I worked with, and this is where I finished, that's great. Oh, that's the other thing too. If it sounds like it was done by an army of one, I'm probably not going to continue. Like, acknowledge that there were other people here and tell me what role they played and how you interacted with them, and then put it out. I see a lot of portfolios that just sound like an army of one, and it's like, I know you didn't do that.
I would say the biggest thing is design it like you're actually a UX designer. I mean, a lot of portfolios I see are like super not reader friendly and show absolutely no understanding of the reader's mentality and how they're actually going to consume the portfolio. So the first time someone reads your portfolio, they're going to skim it, and they're going to skim it very quickly to see if there are pictures and headlines that show them that the content they're looking for is on there. And then they're going to go through it again. So if you don't, I would say like design it kind of with a mobile first mentality, not because people are going to look at it on their phones, but because they need to be able to skim it. So like have like the important things. Imagine like there are 3 things you want the reader to be able to get just through skimming your resume in like 15 seconds. Make sure those things are like in bold, have headlines, have numbers that are easily discernible from text. Don't have giant bodies of giant paragraphs. Have some pictures, but don't have way too many pictures. Some of them I see have just like pictures of Post-its on a wall, and like anyone can put Post-its on a wall. Like,
Yeah,
just,
not
like,
impressive.
so many,
Not impressive.
not impressive. Yeah. So I mean, I want to see. So I do want to see a lot of what he said, but like the biggest thing is like show that you understand how people are going to consume your resume or your portfolio, and make sure you design it that way.
Well, to your point, honestly, my portfolio has been mostly viewed online and after hours. So it's
after hours.
Well, you know, after work hours. So it's usually what I'm seeing is that usually anybody that's going to go and look through any one of these things, unless it's like the same IP, which is usually just the same recruiter hitting my portfolio over and over and over again. If I've sent it out and I know that I sent it out to only very specific people, chances are that they may not be looking at it at work because they're busy at work. But the minute that they're stepping out and they're going through the, hey, I have a couple of portfolios, chances are they will look at it on their commute, on their way home, and start evaluating.
Well, you're getting on something that I try and say is that like design thinking isn't just like something that you do at work, right? So like I think you should actually try and make sure you can measure outcomes and like track how people are interacting with your portfolio, right? And that way you'll be able to see, okay, well the average person spends 6 seconds on my portfolio. That means that like clearly you're doing something very wrong.
Yeah.
You know, like actually measure how people are interacting with your portfolio, with your website or whatever, and that way you'll know what to improve and how to improve it. I would say that's also something you should do with your resume and everything else. Put in email trackers so that if you're emailing someone your resume or whatever, you're cold emailing people, that you can see if they opened it or if they didn't reply and all that stuff. Like it's not just something that you do at work, it's something that you should also leverage in trying to get that job and in life.
Do you want to add something?
I have
Just want to make this one.
a couple things to add. I don't look for these things, but I see them. I see typos all the time. I'm an excellent speller. And I say that not because I'm exactly proud of it. I don't say it. I say it because it's so annoying when I find a typo on a really, really well done portfolio.
Grammarly.com, by the way.
Yes.
Just download it.
Like,
just use it.
like just
It's free.
be mindful that someone is reading your words. Like, have someone who doesn't know anything about what you do read it. Cut out probably 3/4 of the copy in there, and be aware of it. The other thing, and this might go against what some people do, but again, bear in mind that I'm recruiting for a specific skill set. We do not advise using lorem ipsum in testing, because it does not give any context to the user around what this product or whatever you're testing is going to do. So I don't want to see lorem ipsum. I want to see that whatever you created has content in the actual product that supports whatever it is that you're trying to illustrate.
It doesn't have to be good, it just has to not be lorem ipsum.
Well, it has to be like, you know, instead of seeing lorem ipsum, blah, 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 and it's just like walls of that and like in paragraph form and columns. It's like, I don't, and you're telling me this is a product for soldiers, fine, or like people who are in the military. That doesn't tell me anything. Like, I am looking for people who can take an assignment with very little information and plug in the holes. I am not looking for someone who's going to wait for copy being handed to them on a silver platter. So I look at people's portfolios and I see, did they do a good job in filling those holes? Did they make some smart decisions? I mean, I think what these two gentlemen said is very valid, but like bear in mind, like I know there's been a long history of designers misspelling things, and I get that, but it's like, come on, like
Yeah, that's
you
really
don't
bad.
you don't have to do it, you know, you don't.
So when you say let's say a recruiter finds a few candidates, right, do you first look at resume or portfolio?
Resume, I do. I look at resume.
I mean, I think usually resume first, because I think that can help give some context to a portfolio. But oftentimes, a portfolio will have a lot of that information. So I think it's like they'll usually look at like both, take like 15 seconds to look at each one, and then decide if they want to spend more time on it after the initial glance.
Okay.
I'll flip it. I'll do portfolio first, and then resume. I want to see. Here's the thing. At the end of the day, if the resume looks great and the portfolio sucks, they're not getting it.
Sure.
So let me just put the toughest thing out there.
Will you do it the other way around? Portfolio is great, the resume sucks?
If the portfolio is great, so I haven't found that many cases where that's happened. Like if they took the time to go through their portfolio and craft it really well, chances are that they've done the same thing with the resumes. I have seen flipping it the other way around, where some people have sent out the resume and it clearly doesn't sound like they wrote it. It was professionally written by somebody else, and they didn't do that great job with the portfolio. So they paid somebody else to do it. It's like, go ahead, you do what I'm usually supposed to do.
I would say resumes are also easier than a portfolio. Like I think it's easier to put together a good resume than it is to put together a good portfolio.
We got one
Yeah,
question.
One quick, have a LinkedIn,
I'm sorry?
LinkedIn profile.
The LinkedIn
You should have a
profile.
good LinkedIn profile. 100%. You should have a very good LinkedIn
So
profile.
sometimes that, there are many options like apply from a LinkedIn profile or upload resume. But for recruiter side, which is more like a,
I think it depends.
It does.
I'm gonna say that if you've been around the block, my LinkedIn profile doesn't have anything but just where I worked. That's it. And on my resume, I don't write resumes necessarily the way that everybody else does. Usually if it's gonna go through some sort of ATS, I kind of don't want to work there. So that's just a decision that I've made for myself. If a human being isn't going to see it right away, I don't want to work there. So my resume is written where all of my experience is in the front, and then I'll give you my history in the back. Hey, by the way, all of the things that I achieved here, they were done at these places. But the places where I achieved them matter less than the actual achievements themselves.
If you really want to find another job, you should have a really great LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
I would say if it's between clicking apply with LinkedIn or not, I would say that in my experience, people tend to be fairly indiscriminate when clicking the apply with LinkedIn button, because you just have to click one button and you apply. So oftentimes recruiters will kind of like automatically think a little bit less, but I don't think it's necessarily that much of a difference. I would say that as long as your LinkedIn and your resume are both really high quality, you can do whichever one you want.
The thing is too is that with apply with LinkedIn, you can usually fill out a resume that fills in more than just what you have on LinkedIn.
because I was a question,
So-
because I have a visual background, because some people say in the designer field, say like use infographic, that kind of stuff, but at the same time, some people say keep it Word format instead of like, using those visual stuff. I don't know which one, because
The visuals aren't scannable, would be the one thing.
like,
So,
for example, like a PDF, some
They
like.
can be.
Yeah.
I've seen
Some people have a very.
it's a risk, because
Yeah.
sometimes it'll come through and sometimes it won't. Again, I think that if you have to go through, if you're applying through a portal, you're taking more of a risk. If you can get it directly to someone's hands, an infographic can be a great way of setting yourself
Yeah.
apart if it's really well done.
Yeah.
Like perfect. And if there's like a misspelling on an infographic that like ruins all of it.
Okay.
I think it really depends on who your audience is. Like I don't, let's put it this way. I'm making up this company. Some company might be their business. Like infographics might be their business, and if you do a killer infographic, it will attract their attention. But it's not gonna pass like ATS. It's not gonna pass that. For me, it wouldn't matter. Because I look for resumes for two reasons. I look for their typographic skills, because there are a lot of people right now who have very, very poor typographic skills. And I look for very specific prototyping tools. And if I see a typo, I hate them. But, I mean, I will let it pass. I will let it pass because I give them a test anyway. So,
Well, it also depends on the role a lot, because if you're, a lot of job descriptions will say UX designer, but they don't really want a UX designer, they want like an interface designer who can do like a little UX. So I think it depends on the environment you're going into. If you're working in like a role where it's going to be like heavy UX, IA stuff, then like it doesn't really matter how pretty your resume looks as well, as long as it's like very well laid out. But if you're going into a role where they're calling UI UX designer and it's going to be a very visual heavy role, it has to look really good. So I think it depends.
Quick question, and cover letter, is it important?
Yes.
So then generally somebody read it or it being scanned?
it depends.
Yeah,
It's not important for us.
just,
Yeah.
so it depends on
It
where you
depends,
apply?
yeah. But here's the thing. If you have an opportunity to do a cover letter, you should use it as a way to demonstrate your communication skills. So that is what matters more to me. If you can communicate well in a succinct way in a written format.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day is if you have the opportunity to differentiate yourself from somebody else in any way, shape, or form, and that means another artifact, I would say produce it, but produce it with intent.
Right.
If you're just going to regurgitate the stuff that's already on the resume
Yeah.
in a non-bulleted format, it's probably not going to help.
I think resume is largely raw data, and I think the cover letter is where you have the opportunity to tell your story in a really compelling
Yes.
way. So if you're just going to have it be super dry and boring, I worked here and this qualifies me for the role, because then like you may as well not do it. But if you can really be very compelling and tell your story and have it be so your story naturally indicates that you're a good fit for the position in the
Yes.
company,
Yeah.
then
Yes.
that's like incredibly special, and that can be as or more important
Yes.
than the resume itself.
That's true.
If you can make a really good one.
It gives you the opportunity to potentially answer some of the objections that you may have gotten. Say, hey, by the way, I don't have this, but yeah.
It's probably a good strategy, especially if you're not applying to like tons of companies. If you have like 5, or maybe you have referrals,
Yeah.
then you probably, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Right? You're just going to waste a ton of time, write 100 cover letters and not get
Right.
a response anymore.
Yeah, this ties into the be yourself kind of thing, is identify your point of view, where you want to work, where your story naturally indicates you should end up, and then write that cover letter for those companies that you've like put effort into researching. Oh yeah, that's also a thing. Research the companies that you're writing the cover letter to.
Yeah.
That's a very big thing, by the way.
Yeah.
And don't spell their name wrong.
So let's talk quickly about the exercise, right? The design exercise, the test project that you mentioned. What's your, let's do 2 things, briefly describe what exactly you do, give an example, and then give one piece of advice. The most important thing you would advise.
Sorry, give the example of
design
what the test is?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
design challenge and a piece of advice.
Can I add on to that question? Can you also do a research example as well as a design example?
Research is probably going to be a take home, more often than not. It's probably going to go more into detail. I feel like if you were doing research and it was going to be on the spot, I would ask, so what kind of tools have you used before? For what specific use? What kind of specific markers are you looking for, right? And run down that list. But at the end of the day, if you want to give somebody an exercise where they're going to turn data into insights, it's the difference between data into insights. How do I put data into insights? Data, a person spent 2 minutes in the bathroom, a person spent 20 minutes in the bathroom. That's data. Insight, one went number 1, the other one went number 2, right? So data, insights. It may take, depending on the subject, you need to test that, right? So it may take some time for that to come back. When it comes to design thinking, the approach, at least for the stuff that I've done for smaller agencies and for larger companies that I've been at, it's been more focused on your thinking. Is can you tease out the things that you don't know that we have left out on purpose, and can you build something that, yet again, it's another point of differentiation. If I'm asking you to do one thing and it's just a desktop view, and you're telling me how you approached it on mobile, and oh, by the way, this translates to desktop, point of differentiation, right? It's taking that as another opportunity to differentiate yourself and to show your type of thinking. Kind of like what Amos was saying with regards to the cover letter, right?
I never dealt with. Recruiters don't deal with the design challenges. Usually that's after
Do you want
we
one?
passed on.
I would fail.
So,
I'll tell you what ours is, and if you guys want to apply it, you're welcome to do it. So you will have a little more of a hint. So what our design challenge is design a translator. You can do desktop, you can do mobile, doesn't matter. You have to deliver 2 variants. The variants need to be design-wise exactly the same, except for one. You have to be able to translate hello in 3 different languages. In variant A, I believe there's a button that says translate, and when you click the button translate, it actually translates it for you into the language that's specified. In variant B, there is no translate button, and it is automatically changed depending on the language you select. So I had someone, and so that it's deceptively simple, because depending on the app you use, depending on how you design it, it brings up a lot of value. I haven't told you anything about what it should look like. I've given you the ideal flow. And bear in mind, they need to be the same exact design, except for that one difference, because we're going to do the split test, and we want to know which one is going to outperform. I had someone recently who delivered this, and visually the design was okay, but he made a choice I thought was really odd, and I asked him about it, and the choice he made was when the user selected the language. So we have Spanish, French, and German. So it's just European languages. We're not doing any Asian languages. So when we had Spanish, French, and German, when the user selected the translator option for Spanish, he changed the word translate into that language. So translate turned into traducir. And I was like, can you explain your choice? And he was like, well, I thought it'd be fun. And I thought about it, I really, really thought about it. And I was like, if I am going to a translator app, I don't know this language, can you change my call to action button to another word I don't know? How do I know how to use this thing? And we ended up not passing him.
It's cute, but it's not functional.
Right? It doesn't,
Yeah.
the choice didn't make any sense to me. And bear in mind,
well, you could have maybe come up with a better justification. We thought that it would just be fun. Like, that's just the worst. That's the worst justification for a design decision
Fun
ever.
forever is like watching him.
But,
Yeah.
but bear in mind, the design visually was fine. And it was that one choice. And I also, so all of the design tests that come, I make sure that I look at it, and I make sure that someone who does not have a design background looks at it. Because again, you're going to be working with people who don't have a design background. But they are going to be questioning your decisions. So like me and another person always vet. And if she and I are both like, why was this decision made? Then basically we don't pass them.
Yeah, you should be very comfortable justifying design decisions to people who are not designers and maybe think in the business sense. And if you can't do that, then you can't be a UX designer.
So what's your, I wanted to follow up on your specific exercise. What's an example of the deliverable that you got from somebody that was really good? What do you really expect?
I mean, we've gotten several. It's a combination of visual skills, and when I say visual skills, everything just feels like it's in the right place. So it's not necessarily something specific. It's not like you chose the right color. It's not that you chose the right icon. It's just that when we tried to use it, nothing felt strange. Nothing felt like, why is this button way over here? Why is it when you translate, the translation is way down here, but the button is way up here? And that's why, again, I vet these things with someone else. Because I have someone like now what's so interesting is that like she and I have the same opinion, and she also knows what something good looks like. So when she sees something that's good, she's like, I think this person's awesome. And usually I agree. The ones where she's not sure are the ones where the interactions make no sense. So, it's
Turned
just...
her into a designer. You can get someone new now.
Yeah, you've muddied the waters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. So we have 3 different tests. So we may end up picking any one of them. One of the last ones that we used is you're on the last page of Seamless. Seamless wants to appear to be a little better, nicer, more community focused, and therefore they want to add a way for somebody to be able to donate a couple of cents during the checkout flow. How do you do it? Vague enough, you have the screen, and you have a couple of pieces of paper. How do you do it? A
Is
good
that in
example.
person, or is that
In person.
Oh, wow,
That's in
cool.
person, yeah. So you don't need to be perfect. We're at, there's a whole bunch of glass all over the place, so you can have it do it up there if you're more comfortable actually just doing that on paper and then presenting instead of having a whiteboard session of sorts.
How long do they give you for that?
15 minutes. You have 15 minutes. And the best one that we've had for that was somebody that used all of those things and came up with a disruptive way of asking for the money, basically saying, hey, here's, image, hopefully trying to engage you, reason to believe, do you want to CTA, and then that gets added at the end. The second version had it where they were able to add it very much like you have the tip at the bottom, which is like 10%, 15%, 20%. And oh, by the way, you can add something else for a specific charity with a little info button. You click on it, it told you what it was. And they managed to explain themselves well enough to put it onto or to work it back into desktop. They were hired.
Do you expect them to justify everything and almost submit like a mini case study, or do you expect them just to submit the final prototype?
No.
And
They're gonna put it in front of us and we're gonna talk about it. And by we're gonna talk about it, I mean they're gonna talk about it.
Because you're talking about design challenges, and we were talking about about tests. So I assume in your job, right, you guys kind of combine the two, right? So you don't have a separate design exercise and then a separate
Well, a lot of
design
ways do it
challenge, or like a whiteboarding challenge in person.
Yeah, I don't. The take homes are funny. Take homes are funny. I would much rather see quick design thinking on the spot than I would want to see something that came back that could have been done by somebody else potentially. Where I have to see it and then I have to believe what they wrote with regards to it.
If you're getting a take home, they're always going to talk about it in the next interview, almost always. I mean, if any credible, decent hiring manager would do that. But yeah, the design challenge will happen
So
concurrently.
with the take home, do you expect them to kind of go over their process
No.
like in their portfolio, or do you just want the
No,
prototype?
because that's not realistic. Like, we don't ask for that. So the design challenge for us is just a real world, it has two functions. Function number one is it shows the designer what it's really like. So they don't want that type of assignment, it's not a good fit. And there are a lot of people who don't choose to take it. And to be fair, we are iterating all the time. Like this is the current iteration of what this challenge is. This is not the original iteration. And before there wasn't even a challenge. And I would hire people based on X that didn't always work. And to be totally fair, we vet people, and half the time the people we vet, for whatever reason, don't pick up an assignment, or their skills are not as good as their prototypes. That happens all the time. The way it tests you is it allows us to filter the people who don't want that kind of work, because again, it's not a good fit. And then on top of that, it's about like, okay, how well can Phil Hansen? And like, what has been really interesting though, is that by and large, the people who do the best prototypes do the best work, because they have plugged in the holes and they know how to communicate. And every now and then, like, we'll get a prototype and what we'll also do is sometimes the prototype, it works, but there's something wrong with it, and I can tell that it's something that was an accident. Like, one time the prototype was great, but there's clearly a font missing, because there was like an error character. So we were just like, this is great, we know this is missing, can you fix it? And then, that's another test, because you want to see what they say, like, hey, was this intended? You want to see what they respond with. Some people don't respond. Some people respond in a way that doesn't make sense. And then some people are like, yes, here you go. And that's the type of person I want to work with. And that's the type of person I want to offer as a service to other people.
You mentioned you do research as well. Do you mind giving an example of that as well?
Oh, the test?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's in flux. I'm not the one who is hiring for that. And that's also changing. So one of the primary duties we have for people who work off-site is they have to transcribe videos and audio files. They have to transcribe interviews. And when I say transcribe, you have to watch the interview, you have to make notations around what the user is doing, if there's a visual. So like being aware.
Cues and all that.
Yeah, like being aware, like, so the question that's asked is this: what's the user doing? If it's necessary, what's the user's tone? What are they saying? Like, what are you paying attention to? And that's a rough version of her test. She'll send out something to be transcribed based on instructions, and she'll get an analysis. And then I think she'll also ask for an analysis, and she'll get it back based on an interview, and then she'll make a determination.
I mean, I would say you want to, again, think about the hiring manager's mentality. The hiring manager doesn't want to do a bunch of interviews, because if you're, let's say, a UX design lead, you have your own shit to do, and that has to be done by a certain deadline, regardless of how many interviews you have. So when they're giving you a take-home test, they're looking to be able to disqualify as many people as possible. So number one, you have to have a really good prototype. If you are going to annotate stuff, you can do it really well. I would say even if they don't ask you to, you should make sure that it might be somewhat annotated. If they say don't do it, we just want to see a raw prototype, and obviously follow their instructions. But they're looking to be able to disqualify people so they don't have to interview people that are just wasting their time. So yeah, I'll just say that.
For research, just remember they're always going to be looking for three things: thinking, feeling, doing. So specifically with the transcribing of like tapes and like raw data, just like somebody either looking at something or listening to a tape that's coming back, thinking, feeling, doing. Like, what are they thinking at the moment? What are they feeling, if you can get it from tone? And what are they actually doing? Are they confused, or what is it? Describe that. And I know we have at least a couple of researchers here, so thinking, feeling, doing. Okay.
Any questions?
Somebody told me recently that a lot of companies look at Twitter. They said also that I could search for jobs on Twitter by like hashtag tech NYC or something like that. But the first question was more important to me. Is there any other things you guys look at besides, I know we talked about the resume and the portfolio?
Anything else besides resume and portfolio?
Like someone's Twitter or...
I mean, if
You'll usually get Googled. Depending on, like, you'll very often get Googled. You should be Googling yourself. Try to use incognito, do it on another friend's computer so that it won't just see your preferences. And if some really awful shit comes up, if you have like a racist tweet from 7 years ago, like make sure, make sure. Because like, not everyone does it, but you want to make sure, you don't know who will. Like if you look on a careers page, they're not going to say, by the way, we're going to look at your social media profile. So just like, clean it up. Like, don't have pictures of you smoking pot in your profile picture on Facebook. Like assume the worst.
I Google everybody.
And websites, you look at websites a lot, right?
Yeah. For jobs specifically, more than the racist comments and all that other stuff.
So those are okay.
I'm not saying they're okay. I'm saying once that's been weeded out, I'm looking for potential thought leadership. Like, are you out there somewhere else? Have you said something that I may agree or disagree with?
Yeah.
Have you taken a strong stance on something? Right? And then just kind of go from there.
I would say anything that you're not proud of, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Like, just because it doesn't help you.
Even if you're
it's
proud
out
of
there.
it and it's not cool.
Or
You can
like,
be proud of something that's just
Yeah.
not cool. So.
but yeah, like anything that's public knowledge that you think could come back to haunt you, and if you have a spidey sense that's telling you that, just get rid of it.
So I've noticed one thing, that many job applications, they have this field where they ask for if you have a Dribbble account or something like that. So how important is it to have such accounts or work on such websites? Not having your work put up on such websites reduce your chances getting an interview?
No.
Or
No, it's about if you have those and they're shitty, that might reduce your chances, but you don't need to have them. If you have a good portfolio, that's really all that matters.
The one thing that I will say about that though, and just with regards to anything regarding social media, is that the more that you're sharing, the more findable you are as well. Right? So if you're in the middle of a community that is always producing all of these things and all of these visuals or whatever else, and you're putting it out there, and you see, at least from my end, if I see that you started and you were on Dribbble for the past 3 years, and your first year was, I don't know that I would have done that, and your last year is like, there's progression there. There may be a conversation here. I can see how you're interacting with other human beings there as well. It's not going to detract.
But if you're not going to update it,
then it's kind of lost. That's the other thing too. There's a lot of people who have websites and they think it's a really awesome idea to start a blog, and they have 3 posts and the last one was from 2013. It's like, dude, just delete that.
Just to interject there, so if we talk about Dribbble, that's more for visual design, right, and UI design,
Yeah.
right? So that would not be your
Interactions.
primary channel.
Interactions,
right?
yeah.
So it's, would be the portfolio, the UX portfolio, the resume.
But it's very often a portfolio will link to a LinkedIn, a Dribbble, Behance, whatever. It's very, very common. And there are also some other websites like Free and Willing that also link to the Dribbble and the Behance and stuff like that. So if it's there, assume someone's going to look at it. Don't have it for no reason. If you're going to do it, just do it right. It can improve things, but it's by no means necessary.
So I don't know, I would love to hear your guys' opinion on this, but in my experience, a lot of people hiring for UX really want a strong visual designer, and they just think that a UX person just does everything. So, all right, so if you are the type of person who has a bunch of wires under your belt, that is not enough to get hired. What is enough to get hired are things like I'll give an example. I hired someone to do some work on our platform, and I was looking for someone who I thought had a decent visual eye, meaning I looked at her portfolio online and I felt like somebody chose to make, she might have used a template, but that's okay, because she chose that template and she chose to employ it. The reason that I brought her in for an interview was because she had several iterations of a dashboard. And that is what I was looking for. I was looking for someone who understood how to create dashboard views, who understood how to iterate based on feedback. And she had multiple examples of that, and that is what I was looking for. I did not hire her because she had wireframes. I hired her because she had specific types of wireframes showing types of interactions that I thought would be valuable. So I have now seen, and I don't know if you guys have seen, I have now seen a lot of portfolios coming out of GA. And I also took part-time course in GA, so like I understand what that is. The reason that's problematic is, number one, we do a ton of group projects. So I've now seen the same project on 4 different portfolios, and I have no idea who did what. And on top of that, they're all named the same. So even if it's like a different project, but it's named the same, then I feel like I've seen the same project 8 times. And it's very difficult to know. So the wall of Post-its is not helpful. It's just not. I think that what really you need to think about is, again, what value can you bring to the company? And it could be that maybe your value is better suited to research, and you create wires based on the research you do. Or it could be, if you really do want to become a designer, maybe you're better served thinking through what is your optimal font size for being on mobile. It's not you don't want it to be tiny, you want your hit areas to be large. There's a lot of other considerations. Maybe that's what you want to focus on, or maybe you want to focus on wearables, or whatever. But then take the time and think about how to design for that. I think that there are people hiring for junior UX, but again, I personally feel like I'm not sure, I don't know if the people who are hiring know what they're hiring for.
Yep.
And I also know that more and more lately, people are coming to me and telling me, well, you know what, actually, we would prefer someone who has a visual eye, but who knows how to make wires. I hear that a lot. And what I think companies are realizing is visual design is a skill in itself. And it's making wires is not a good indicator of your skill as a designer.
Well, I would say as a recruiter, our lives are made horrible when a hiring manager will tell us, oh, we're looking for a UI UX designer, we're looking for this, and they just have no, someone's saying they need a product designer, what they need is a UX designer, there's no real consensus in terms, so ignore the title and look at the actual description and the duties, find out what you're actually going to be doing and what's actually expected of you. I would say that's a huge thing, because there's just so much jargon and buzzwords and so many people use them so differently, and it's just such a gigantic pain in the ass.
It seems like especially startups basically want the hybrid, right? The UX, UI person.
No, not
Everyone
just,
says
not just
T-shaped
the
skill
startups.
set, by the way. That's a huge, when we were dealing with hiring managers, when you mentioned T-shaped skill set, that was a throwback to my recruiting days. That is a huge thing, but it's also another meaningless buzzword, because when someone says that, they really, that might mean I want a visual designer who can do UX, and not I want a UX designer.
Well, and here's the other thing too. There's the visual designer that can do UX. Doing UX doesn't mean putting out wireframes. Honestly, wireframes is 5% of what you're going to do. right? All you're doing is communicating your thinking through wires. That is all you're doing. And if 95% of the thinking that you have sucks, it doesn't matter how pretty your wireframes are, because you're probably going to find the button in the wrong place. It's a really pretty button, but it's just not that usable. So
I would say a lot of portfolios also kind of seem to lose, like a UX designer, like you said, is not about creating wireframes, it's about being a user advocate, while keeping business value in mind. It's absolutely important as well.
And
so,
the other part of the Trinity, so you have business, you have user, but you have tech too. Like you gotta be able to build this. There's a lot of stuff that I end up seeing on Dribbble, which is like you have the boundaries of just about every box bouncing or flexing or moving all over the place. And listen, at the end of the day, again, it's cute, but it's not usable. And chances are that you're gonna get pushback from your dev saying, we're not doing that. That's an extra.
and then they hate you.
And then they hate you on top of that. And good luck trying to get them to do extra work the next time that you have a
Oh
project.
yeah, and that's real. I actually, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I was actually putting together kind of like a workshop on how to better facilitate cross-functional collaboration between designers and engineers, and I found out that a lot of engineers hate designers exactly for reasons like that, and because designers don't take an effort to really think about how devs think about these things. So, I mean, that might not be the biggest thing when it comes to getting hired, but especially after, like, first of all, if in your portfolio you can demonstrate empathy for, your team and the different kinds of resources you'll be working with, I think that's pretty great. A lot of hiring managers won't notice that, like HR will not notice that, recruiters probably won't notice that, but a hiring manager should be able to appreciate it, if they're a product manager especially. But yeah, I think that's important.
Just want to do a quick recap, and then I'll take your question afterwards, right? So, you guys, Jose, you basically do the in-person interview challenge only, right? So in your case, Michelle, you are doing the test project with kind of the design exercise, but you don't really do the whiteboarding, right? In person stuff.
No, and we cap the, we tell them to spend 1 to 2 hours max. Like, because again, and we tell them, we're like, you can use the
People
time.
don't listen to that. People don't listen. Like, as someone who was like a recruiter who worked with candidates, like they were always working longer than they were supposed to, and they would tell me that. Like very often, if you actually don't give them, like, let's say you wanted 3 hours and say spend 3 hours, like you really have to have something that traps. They're liars.
I've heard about like some companies doing basically both.
Okay,
Yeah.
but here's the thing. So again, want to reemphasize that like how we staff is different. So what we tend to do is like, if you do a decent job on the test, we just throw you in water. And then you get to work with real users of our platform. And then that's where you really find out what you're made of. Because if you are spending 2 hours on a static image, I'm going to call you out for it because that doesn't make any sense. So like again, like it's very, very experimental and iterative. Like we're dating lots of people. He's trying to get married.
He is married, yeah.
All right, so
I'm currently actively looking for a job opportunity, and that's why, because I'm subscribing lots of the email, job alert,
Please speak up a little.
I subscribe lots of the email, job alert, such as Glassdoor, LinkedIn, whatever. But for me, like I sometimes find that maybe there are many, the company looking for UX, UI, or UI, UX, but it seems like job description look like a user interface designer.
Yep.
To me, it's so hard to tell if it's a UX designer. But there are so many companies also. What is the best way to find that this company is really looking for UX designer, or just maybe confusing user interface?
After you're hired, see what they tell you to do.
Well, maybe, and recently I just found that company saying production designer, but it was actually UX role.
Yeah. So we're gonna go back to research. So you're being asked to do something. The easiest way to see what you're being asked to do is to go back to that company. LinkedIn is a wonderful tool. Look at the designers that work within there, then seek their portfolio. See if there's anything that they've been updated recently. Go look at that. Go start stalking people who are doing the things that you're being asked to do. And then see what's being produced. Sometimes these companies will actually put their portfolios up, like what they're working on, but when they're not, look at their workers.
Okay.
That's really good too.
That'll pay off sometimes, but a lot of times I think you won't end up
Because
getting
I
much.
may not be receiving this much, like, job alert, and just take a look, almost like spending a.
Honestly, there's only, like, it's about like, hiring is about de-risking on both sides. Like
Yeah.
on some level, you're only going to know what you do once they start telling you to do things. So you can ask them a lot of questions, but like, I mean, things don't always work out the way you think they will. So like, you have to be prepared for that.
Attaboy.
Well, also, they might not know what they're hiring for, and that's really common. Like
Yeah.
there was a role open like a year or so ago for Salesforce, and my colleague connected me to this person. He was like, "Yeah, I'm looking for a designer. Maybe you can help me." So he sent me the job description, and the position was like analyst. And I read this description 3 times, and I finally found the design part. And then we got on a
It was a
call.
footnote.
And we got on the call, and I was like, "Hey, I just want to make sure. So you need a designer?" He's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Okay." I was like, "So, I'm just gonna let you know. In my opinion, this does not read like you're looking to hire a designer." And then I got him I connected him to someone who is a really solid designer who worked in the past, just to like have coffee, just to talk about what designers look for. And he had the same reaction. He was like, "Yeah." He's like, "At first glance, this is like someone who's gonna make like Excel documents all day. Like, I don't understand." And then guess what? They revised their description later. They ended up not hiring for that. They ended up changing it completely. So like
you said earlier, it's not like job descriptions are like descended from the gods, right? Like there are people drawing them up, and some hiring managers are very good at it. Some are very, very bad at it. You know, so like you can't necessarily always count that the job description is going to be a reliable description of what you end up doing. And hey, they might actually think that's a reliable description. It might be a good description of what's in their heads, but then things change. So you kind of have to understand the environment in which you're entering and how they operate.
So let's say, kind of the next step in the process, let's say they did amazing on the test challenge. Let's say they did great on the whiteboarding exercise. What's next? Like, and you can give an example of like what happens next and what's your advice on this?
What happens? Like, say for instance, like we're extending an offer.
No,
Do you extend the offer right away, right after the whiteboarding challenge? And the in-person?
Oh, no,
Is
not right
there
then and there. They're probably going to end up hitting back. It depends.
I understand maybe like not the same day, but like,
Yeah.
are there any extra steps involved? Like any negotiation?
It depends if we need to weed through a couple of things. There's sometimes where you have that one candidate and you're like, all right, I know we have to try and bring them on, and you'll go to the negotiation, right? There's sometimes where you may have rare cases, unfortunately, where you may have 3 or 4 candidates and you may have 1 seat. You're like, whoa, can I just have like a quarter of each of you? And like, that'd be great. And at that point, you may need to add an extra layer of things to figure out, right? Which is, so all of these guys are looking for what next? Are they going to get it here, or are they just going to use this gig as leverage for the next gig? Can we grow them within, right? So is this person almost senior? Because if this person is almost senior, and these 3 are kind of mid-level designers, I may take a chance on the mid-level designers, thinking that they may grow a little bit more where we are, right? So there's a couple of these other things, and then after that is the negotiation part, right?
Do you have any tips on the negotiation part?
You're only paid what you negotiate. You're only worth what you negotiate. I had to learn that the hard way. There were often times where I would say, oh yeah, I'll take XYZ, and I got a straight up yes straight away, and I was like, damn it, like clearly didn't ask for enough. I'll say this past time, I asked for a certain amount, they came back down a little bit, I got a counter offer and a bigger title somewhere else, and I told them about that, and they're like, dude, really, we can't do anything else, and I'm like, great, that's the price.
And also, by the way, as a point of insight, a colleague of his that I was working with, she took the job, did not do any negotiation at all, and she probably could have gotten a decent amount more. When I was recruiting, I helped a bunch of people, because there's actually a lot of research on this. So somewhere around 95% of hiring managers expect some kind of negotiation. And I think about 90% of them said that they would never rescind an offer due to negotiation. So basically, like, don't be a dick about it, right? Like, be reasonable, understand your value, what you need, and like, don't be an asshole. And like, even if they say no, like, the offer still might be on the table, as long as you were just a respectful human being. Insofar as the interview process is concerned, I think there are a couple things that come into play here. Number one, desperation. Companies that are more desperate have to have a shorter interview process.
Oh,
A lot of companies, a lot of companies that have like a crazy amount of inbound flow and have people who are like, oh man, I really want to work at this place. They can afford to have longer cycles. That being said, specific teams within those companies might hire a little faster. So companies like Facebook and Google are notorious for having very long cycles, but I do know people have been hired in a much shorter timeline depending on what the leader of that team really needed or was looking for. I will say that the process is never that, I mean, it really like more conservative enterprises, like sometimes they'll be really rigid, but that's because they're shitty companies. Usually at a good company, they'll move at the speed they need to. If they really like you and you're like, oh, well, I'm interviewing in a bunch of places, I would love to interview with you guys, they'll speed things along. But like I worked with a startup called Action IQ, and they're a well-funded like Sequoia-backed startup, early stages, and they had like a 7 or 8 step interview process for like a super senior product designer. Like the person that I had in process with them ended up becoming an executive director at like McKinsey. So this is like a super amazing guy, and he was really interested in the job, but they had a 7-step process and were unwilling to revise it, and then we're like, oh man, we can't believe that guy ended up taking another job. So like some people just don't know how to hire very well.
Well, and like with anything else, it's with the design process as well. If you're going to die by the process, and you're not going to lean out and speed things along a little bit, you're probably not going to do very well either. So the process is there to set a framework and to help you, but if it becomes your detriment at the same time, you need to revise your process.
Just want to, Michelle, what was your biggest, the one thing you really liked about a candidate when you hired them, and the one thing that really turned you off about a candidate when you said no?
I tried to sue thing, and that didn't make any sense. It just didn't. That was like the most recent thing. Where it's like, when that person translated the translate button into Spanish.
Yeah.
And they did in the end, it was just like, it doesn't make any sense. And that happened pretty recently. Because he was a decent visual designer, that wasn't the problem.
Did they spell it right in Spanish?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember if he did it in German and French either. But anyway, so I mean, other than that, so we did bring someone on. So again, like we're very startup-y, so we change the rules all the time. And we brought someone on who did a prototyping test, and I was like, okay, let's give him a shot. He's a little junior, but why not, right? The guy delivered something that was not quite what was asked for, and I know this because I read the request. And he spent a lot of time on it, and it didn't make any sense, and we couldn't use it. And he basically fought tooth and nail because I was like, I don't understand how this took you 3 hours, because we gave you all the assets and we gave you the instructions, and it was a pretty clear, easy thing to do. And he was like, no, and he gave me like a giant list of reasons why. And he was like, nope, this is how much it costs you. I'm not backing down. And so I've been empowered in my role to pay people.
To kill people.
To pay people in that, like, you did the work, we agreed on your rate, and I will push back, but it depends on the designer. And so we paid him, and we don't use him anymore. And I told him that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, so we paid him, so he got maybe $100-something out of the deal, but we're not going to use him again. Because it's worth it, because we don't want to get a reputation we don't pay for work. Like, that doesn't work for us. We want more people to apply, but we paid him for what he delivered, and we're not using him anymore.
I think one of the biggest reasons why I strongly advocate the whole rule number 1 is be yourself type thing is because one of the things that I always hated when I would talk with candidates, that hiring managers really don't like either, is when they kind of have a lack of character, and that is they're in an interview, whether it's on the phone or in person, and they just think, let me just try and think real quick what the hiring manager wants to hear, and there's no authenticity, there's no real, obviously you want to filter somewhat, but you don't want to be filtering too much to the point where you kind of like lose what's interesting about you, and you just become boring, two-dimensional. Nobody likes that, because interviewing is already a chore, and if you can just authentically connect with somebody and have a good time having a conversation, that's really important. So if you kind of know, if you're doing a good job at prospecting the kind of companies that you're interviewing with, and they're actually good fits for you, then you can actually kind of be yourself, and I think that's really important is to find a way to bring yourself into the interview and not just have it be super boring. Like, what's your biggest weakness? Well, my biggest weakness is that I work too hard, and just all this like prefabricated nonsense where it's like obvious that you like thought out answers to these questions in advance, and it's not like a dynamic conversation.
So basically, your biggest turnoff is of like when people, are not really being themselves or being too fake. And
Yeah, it's just you want someone.
what's the biggest thing you loved about somebody?
I would say character and authenticity, like the exact flip side of that. Like I think that's really meaningful. And obviously, if you're really interesting and really authentic, but your work sucks, then you're not going to be hired, right? So assuming that your work is up to par, I think it's really important that you're able to interact with people. You're able to interact with people and connect with people, because I also think that's a big thing about being a designer.
I didn't answer the question. I just realized, sorry, because you had asked about what was great. Like, so again, prototyping test is just a measure to see how you really perform under pressure, right? The truth is we don't know how good, or not, I shouldn't say good, we don't know how well you will perform based on the assignments we give you until you've had at least 3 under your belt. And we know that, right? So I get told all the time, like I've one of my colleagues or multiple colleagues, this designer didn't follow my directions. This designer gave me something that made no sense, all right? That happens pretty much every day. And then I love him, or I love her. Like this happened earlier. It's like, she is amazing. She took something that was not really fully formed and she gave me this thing that I can use. That's what I listen for. And the people who get that kind of accolades, I remember why we hired them, and I try to hire the same type of people and try to minimize hiring the people who burned us in the past.
Basically, great customer feedback.
Basically, yeah.
And then find somebody else.
Jose?
Yeah. On our end, something that definitely resonates is authenticity, through and through. Somebody could be very quiet and reserved. It's not like the amount of energy that you're bringing into it, but definitely if you're authentic, you can, in the middle of a conversation, you can hold opinion quite loosely at the same time. Like you're willing to say, I really believe this, but what you just said makes sense as well. There's probably going to be a good working dynamic there, because there's going to be more than one Eddie on the table at all times. Biggest turnoff? Somebody talking about another one of the trio, so whether it's business user or dev, right? If this person says, yeah, for the most part I tend to work with blah, 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 but man, devs are a pain in the ass. They're always asking for this, and it's like, whoa, really? Because that's 1/3 of the people you're going to be working with.
Actually, there was a candidate I had that was amazing. She's still a good friend of mine, but she was interviewing with the company that he works at now, and there was, during the phone screen, on paper she was an amazing candidate. I still think she would have been a good fit, but she said something a little negative about, a CTO of a company that she worked with, about the tech side or something, and that's what they hated. So Paul Petrowski ended up saying, no, we don't like her. She shit talked the dev team or the CTO or whatever. She was instantly thrown out of the picture.
You have too many names.
He's not in New York.
Yeah, that's too bad. You can't reach him.
Physically, he's in New York right now, but he doesn't work.
So let's take a few more questions from the audience, and then you guys can move on.
Hi, kind of related. So we were talking that a portfolio is what really will say whether you actually have the talent or not. Like a resume is just, like a initial screening process. So for a more junior designer person, what have you seen that has made, even though the resume is less strong of what you might require, on first read, what in your experience has made it pop out enough to say like, okay, this person is junior and he clearly has the talent, like maybe it will be a good fit?
Yeah, I'm gonna leave that, but like the resume is still a very important part of what you're doing. Like it sounds like you're just kind of like underestimating how important it actually is. The portfolio is super important, but resume is still also very, very, very important.
Yeah. So that's kind of my question. Like, what have you seen that
makes you pop?
That a resume that doesn't have the strengths that you may are looking for, but they have made it in a way that it's like, okay, this person maybe doesn't have all the
Yeah,
all the
that's
experience.
that's another one of those reasons why I like to look at the portfolio first. I don't want the resume muddying what I'm about to see. So I would much rather see your talent first and then you explain how you got there, right? So if I'm looking at your portfolio, chances are is that if I'm seeing that you have some sort of project for Coca-Cola, and I clearly know that that project never made it out, you were making something up, right? Which is not necessarily the worst thing, but if you gave me like good thought from beginning to end, I'm looking more at that than just about anything else. Chances are is that in class or wherever you're coming from, you had the opportunity to put something together. Or if you take these guys' advice, you've probably partnered up with somebody else to come up with another project, right? At the end of the day, you're thinking. You're thinking, you're thinking, you're thinking. And being able to communicate that visually, right? If you can marry those two really well and show me that, I'll go ahead and I'll look at your resume, but honestly, at the end of the day, I don't really care where you came from. I care where you're going to take your career from there out.
Well, I would say that there's no excuse. Like, you might have a not great resume in that you don't have a job as a professional UX designer, you go to an amazing school, but you can always work on your own projects and display initiative. Like I've met a lot of GA grads who I wouldn't have worked with me for free, and that's because they have no initiative. And I think that's a huge thing is that people, they expect, oh, I have a certificate, I can get a job. But nothing's going to be handed to you. So go out there, work on your own projects, work with somebody else, put that in your resume, put that in your portfolio. I know this guy, when I was recruiting, I came across him, and he was like a magical unicorn. He went to GA, launched, then worked independently, worked with a few friends. And it wasn't anything, he wasn't starting like a real business, but he shipped 2 apps to the iOS App Store. And they were nice apps. He put together really great case studies on them. Those are both on his resume. He got a job at an Amazon subsidiary. And I don't think he's with them anymore. He got another job recently. But like, you can do that. And no one can stop you from doing that, right? Like a hiring manager saying no to you can't stop you from working on your own shit. So do that. Like, there's no excuse for having an empty resume when you can work on your own stuff.
Like
You'd
showcase.
probably be a big advocate for it, but there's tons of hackathons in New York City throughout the entire US.
Hackathons suck.
So hackathons are great. You're gonna squeeze out ideas out of who knows how many people. You don't have to go there with your own idea. You can partner up with somebody that has an awesome idea. They may or may not have a dev, but you have something to work with. You want to fill your resume up with a cool project during one weekend? Go to a hackathon. Like, here's a potential solution that maybe won, maybe didn't win, but you tried your best at putting that story together.
So for you guys, showcasing that kind of stuff is even more important than just saying like, oh, I work at this startup and I was.
And you did what?
Uh-huh.
Because there's some people that's like, oh yeah, I worked at such and such. I was like, all right, great. So what did you work on? Well, I did these things, and it's like, well, it doesn't sound like you were the one necessarily thinking about what you were putting on paper. Somebody was telling you essentially to be like, they're brain and you're going to be hands, and all you're doing is wireframe. Don't want to see that.
One of the biggest reasons people don't hire junior UX designers is because they don't have initiative. And they don't have the time to tell people what they need to do and spoon feed them. So if you can demonstrate that you have real initiative and grit and you're self-directed and self-motivated, that goes a huge way.
I had a person that I used to work with like 10 years ago that reached out because they saw that I had the gig that I do, and they're like, hey, so I hear that your company's hiring a UX designer, and they send me their stuff, and I'm like, so there's a lot of pretty pictures, but there's no story here, right? So can you, even if it's just like your 3 best ones, can you just narrate them? Because, oh, by the way, these are the guys that are already here, and this is not even your competition. These are the people that have already gotten through. Your competition is trying to do what these guys already did, right? And I gave that back, and what I got back was, well, you know, I currently have a full-time job, and it's kind of difficult to go in, and it's like, I'm not the same battle everybody else is, right? So, back to what you said, it's the person that has that initiative to look, if nothing else. You can be stressed out, have bags under your eyes, as long as you clean them up right before your interview, it's all good. But if you were up until like 3 o'clock for the past month putting a knockout portfolio, you're not going to have bags under your eyes for much longer. But do the work.
Unless you work at an agency and then you'll just be working like 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
That's not always. Not always. Sometimes, but not always.
Yeah, just in case some of you guys weren't aware, Amos was organizing, still organizing a lot of time.
Yeah, so I was joking.
Oh, you do?
Hackathons are great.
Oh, okay.
That's why I was there. So let's do this. Let's, if you have a question, mention also who the question is for, so we can take more of these. So that one person only answers, and like whoever you want to answer.
Okay,
Yeah.
about recruiting. So where I used to work, was a tech agency, we hated recruiters because they
Oh,
would
they're
cold
the
call
worst,
all
okay.
the time. And so that was considered kind of a bad referral also because if you were in touch with a recruiter, that candidate could not get in touch with the company directly anymore. So here it seems like recruiters say, yeah, but we're kind of like the referral, we're the shoe-in. So how should I see that? Is
No,
it
I don't agree
a
with
bad
that.
idea or?
I mean, but I'm not a recruiter anymore. I think lots of recruiters are terrible, terrible people.
It was.
I was my recovering recruiter. But no, I think that's not the case. I mean, there are, so actually when I just started working in my agency, they were working with Amazon. And the way that if you're dealing with a large company, we work too, and the same thing, the recruiter will end up inputting your resume into an ATS themselves. And there's a special recruiter portal, but at the end of the day, it's still going into an ATS, right? So if a recruiter who's bringing you into a massive company, there's no point, there's no value there. But when it comes to like smaller companies like his, like we worked directly with the hiring manager and got their resume into your hands. We spoke with candidates for like a certain amount of time, had notes there. So like, if you're working with recruiters, I mean, it's going to mean something because it takes time to work with recruiters. You have to sink some time into telling them what the role is and what the requirements are. So it's definitely better than nothing. That being said, I would definitely think about who you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a recruiter from Cybercoders, JobSpring, What is it? I forget. They're awful. Like Cybercoders and JobSpring or JobVite. It's WorkSpring and JobVite. Right. So any of those companies, like you may as well like throw your resume directly in the trash because that's what the hiring manager is going to do once that recruiter gives it to them.
So I assume your question was for Amos, or who was it for?
Well,
No,
the
you're the
people who
recruiter.
are
He's a
used
recruiter.
to working with recruiters
Don't you
from
call me that
agencies.
anymore, man. I'm not a recruiter.
So let's do who's next. Who's your question for?
Have you ever dealt with somebody that had a lot of proprietary projects and maybe only had a couple of things that they put together outside?
Were you asking the question?
Who are you?
Him on the right, because you probably dealt with that.
Yeah, the NDA. There are a lot of people who will end up putting up work password protecting certain projects. I've certainly done it before. The stuff that I've been working on for close to the past year, I cannot show anyone. So even then, say for instance, I'm doing something for a large financial company. If I was going to another large financial company, I may have to pause even before showing them, because they may be competing for the same things. So I may have to say, hey, I kind of sort of know what you're talking about here. I'm happy to run you through something else that I'm doing, but I can't necessarily show you this thing. But more often than not, if you're going to an agency, you can probably just show like, hey, I've been working on these things. Can't put it out yet because it's still under NDA. To give you an idea, there's a couple of projects that I wasn't able to put up on my website and I'm still working through them. I worked on them back in like September of last year. They didn't launch until March of this year. Couldn't put them out there, right? So you have to password protect them, or say, this is the stuff that I can show publicly, and oh, by the way, and this is slightly less nice or polished, but you can have a PDF that runs through all that stuff. I don't like it as much, but I also understand like, hey, if it's NDA and you want to send this to me via email and then have me delete it, then fair enough.
No, I would say be very careful with that. Password protecting is one way. The other way is I've seen them say, I can bring my computer and show you this in person, but I cannot email it to you. I would say like, it depends who you're working with. Some of these NDAs aren't enforceable, and some of them the company doesn't really care about that much, but if you're working with like a major company on some super proprietary stuff, like don't email that to anybody. Like it's an awful idea. And be very careful about who you give that password to. I would say like, don't give the password to a lot of recruiters. If they're from Cybercoders and those other ones that
So just to remind you guys, Michelle, Amos, Jose, next question.
So Jose, you mentioned about a designer being able to work with cross-functional teams.
Yeah.
So you mentioned don't talk bad about one of those three.
Yeah.
Well, how do you make a determination that someone can work well with all sorts of stakeholders besides saying I work well with this cross-functional team?
You can't fake the funk. It's pretty easy to see a narrative through and through and through and through, right? You have your resume. It'll give you some ideas. Probably not so much, fairly raw data. You have your portfolio. That's why I said on the portfolio, if it sounds like you're an army of one, I'm gonna go ahead and call bullshit on that. You didn't do that by yourself. So if you're saying, hey, by the way, I interfaced with this team and that team and this team, and all together we were able to bring this to life, and then I go ahead and I ask you some questions during your interview, and you're telling me what your process was and what your touch points were, I'm gonna get a pretty good idea of who you're working well with and who you're not interfacing that well with, right? So it's not one thing that you're gonna do right or wrong, it's the way that you continuously tell that story. You're either gonna add layers to it or you're gonna pull holes through it yourself. People will usually do that for themselves.
It's also communication.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it to one answer.
Yeah.
So who is next?
Maybe Amos. Talking about, maybe question about people who switching career, maybe 180 degrees, mid-career, but to be start over with the UX researchers. How the experience in the past can tell the story. How would you recommend?
Well, the first thing is don't be too ambitious in how far you're trying to lead. So I would say make one switch at a time. So if you're, let's say you're a print designer and you want to start working in UX at startups. So maybe the first step is you get a visual design role, and then from there you transition to UX. Let's say you're working in industry A, the automotive industry, and you want to move into a different industry. You can't make too many of these jumps at once, because when it comes to storytelling, the imagination can only go so far, and you want the hiring manager to have to use as little bit as possible in kind of piecing together that story of where you're coming from and how you're going to be successful going in. So if you want to make a giant career switch, I would say don't. Try and find a way to minimize it while making yourself happy and putting yourself on the path there. So if I would say either switch industry but stay in the same role that you're doing, or switch roles, or switch industries with the same role, or vice versa. But focus more on sustainability. Like, you're not going to be able to switch into your dream career overnight. That doesn't happen.
Right.
So just kind of identify what's a sensible path from getting where I am to where I'm going to be, and then just chunk it up and take time.
Yeah, that's why maybe it's not such a dream career, because some people switch the career. For example, if I work in architecture for 15 years, now I want to switch to UX research. As a researcher with the cognitive experience, how can I tell the story that, you really work in architecture
Old
for
school
so long?
designers love architects.
But
They do.
But you should know though, that's an extremely successful switch.
Yeah.
There are a
But
lot
it's
of
difficult
architects
to
who
put
go
into
this
the
It depends who you're.
application scan systems, things like that, because there's not a lot of keywords that really match. I understand that
You can
there's
always
a lot
put
of
keywords in
process.
there. You can always put the keywords in there. Like always. I'm not saying stuff it, but that's why you can have an objective or a summary on the top of your resume. I want to be a UX. You can look at the keywords in the job description, and there's always room to put them in your resume.
I actually used to play the system, and I had a box at the top. Not even kidding.
In white font.
Well, no, specifically.
Like a regular set,
Well, but it's like here, if it was going to be a Twitter blast out, it would have all the hashtags, like hashtag designer, hashtag whatever, and it would have all the keywords at the top, and then at the bottom I would have the rest of my resume. So it's like, hey, so it's good for your ATS, damn that ATS, and then it's good for people as well. I decided to get rid of that and get rid of ATS.
Yeah, overall it's a great, as these guys mentioned, it's a great background. I met a few people who actually did that switch.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of just repositioning, maybe trying to take some, learn online or learn independently or do something.
Right.
Maybe do a project, for a non-profit or whatever.
Right.
Do something. Basically show something. And then, because they love that background.
There you go.
Go into VR.
We're going to recruit
Go
them.
into
No.
VR.
What I was going to say is there are a lot of people.
AR, VR, that's
I think any hiring manager in VR who knows their stuff is probably very interested in people who have experience in architecture.
That's true.
thank you.
You should find somebody who did it because there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who made that switch.